When I ask people about their favorite scenes in Worm, almost everybody mentions Leviathan, though it's rarely the first choice. I personally feel that everything leading up to Leviathan is a prologue to what Worm really is. As much as everything that we've covered so far is still head and shoulders above the rest of the superhero media, it was Leviathan that made me say, oh shit, now we're in deep water. In order to understand why that part had such a strong effect on so many readers, it's not enough to analyze the text. We need to understand the interaction, the magical thing that happens when the reader meets the text. We're going to talk about both, and I'd like to start with the reader by asking you a question. Do you remember a moment when you learned something that made the entire world worse? I'm not talking about things that happened to you or people close to you, but about reading something online or being told something and having your image of the entire world worsen, darkened because of it. A moment when you realized that the world that you live in was never as good as you thought it was. Maybe it was reading about something specific like MK Ultra, or using your unrestricted internet access to come across a video of somebody getting killed and realizing in a deep sense that this is something that could happen in real life, something that happens to people. Or maybe it was something broad like discovering that human trafficking is a thing that exists, or that people in power actually wage wars in order to make money, something that we should never stop being disgusted and infuriated by. Either way, at some point in your life you had felt that disillusion. I'd like to talk about a disappointment that I've been through, and maybe you've been through too. When I finished Worm, there was nothing that I wanted more than to read more stuff like it. When I found out that the author wrote 5 more books, I was fucking thrilled. I thought they were all going to be like Worm, with these complex philosophical statements and hyper-dense symbolism, but when I started reading, I found out that, let's say, it wasn't the can of worms I was expecting to open. Pale was the one I read the most out of after Worm, reading a fifth of it, or 1.3 Lord of the Rings trilogies, before quitting. It's definitely a happier book than Worm, while still giving you that window into someone else's suffering that Wildbow likes so much. Instead of just placing a token black character, Wildbow makes you feel what it's like being a black preteen girl and not knowing if people are mean to you because they're racist or because they're asses. Also, it has this really cool metaphor for Wildbow's writing with the wild practitioners, and I love the protagonist so much. Except for Snowdrop, I don't like her at all. Such a crybaby, and she's not even hilarious. But shortly after the beginning, it starts to feel rushed and meandering in a way that, for me, outweighed everything else. The theme of loneliness, however beautifully presented, doesn't really develop into a statement like the themes in Worm do, and the plot doesn't carry you forward as much, sometimes at all. But more importantly, it is not hyper-dense. I would not be able to make an essay like this about Pale, or at least not nearly as many. But I'm not blaming the author. I'm pretty sure the blame is on us, the readers. Most of you probably know that the consensus is that Worm's sequel was basically ruined because of reader feedback that was, less than productive. Wildbow himself takes full responsibility for Ward, but also writes about how horrible it was to hear his own fans tell him to step down and let fanfiction authors take over the story. If you make art, you probably know how one mean comment takes more space in your mind than 10 encouraging ones. First time I read this stuff, it triggered the fuck out of me, particularly after reading that the man is living alone and working himself to death to maintain the pace in which he's writing. For that reason, I really wanted to avoid reading more about Wildbow's complicated relationship with his fans. It genuinely makes me worry. I ended up doing it anyway to make sure I'm not making stuff up, and I really wish I didn't have to. But even if you haven't read Wildbow's thoughts, this hostility is hard to miss. On Reddit, on fanfiction comment sections, even on the comments to these videos, it's so common to see people point out mistakes Wildbow allegedly made in a tone that is either angry or mocking. This shit infuriates me. Let me be clear, there is nothing wrong with saying that you didn't like the timescape or got bored in the parts that came after. On the first read, I didn't like that arc either. But it's weird for me to see readers comment on an author who is doing their best to write the best book ever and mocking said author for only succeeding most of the time. Like, even if you do think that writing like that is easy, and if you do, please send me your writing, it's bound to be amazing, it's weird to be angry at a person for trying and failing. Like, do you think that he would have written the timeskip if he knew people would hate it this much? In fact, there are two reasons that this shit infuriates me. One is that the author, this person who has given me this beautiful thing for free, I'm going off script here, Worm didn't have to exist. Like, there are books that you know would have existed no matter what, but Worm could just not have existed. Like, if the man would not have written this, I would not have Worm. This is insane to me. And that person who gave this beautiful thing to me, who had made my life so much better, and helped me process some real shit, was really hurt by that. It made many of his days worse. The whole process of writing became less fun. Worse yet, it disconnected him from the community itself, at least partially. The trust in the community was lost. The second reason this shit infuriates me is that the loss of trust led, very probably, to the books coming out worse. This is a very selfish fury. I'm furious that they made Ward worse for me. That a more supportive community would have most likely supported a better Pale into existence. And the saddest part is that most of the community is great. I've had so much fun discussing theories on Reddit, and I got so much helpful feedback from the fanfic community on my experiments with Walbo's tools. And still, there was always a feeling of, how do I put this? Obviously, a community that revolves around a book like Worm is going to be more traumatized than the general population. Some people react like Taylor by taking more responsibility and trying to see other perspectives, and a small minority acts like Rachel and early-stage Lisa by being aggressive and derisive, respectively. From what I see, the hostile minority is bigger in Worm fans than in other fandoms, and I think the likely hypothesis is that it had a negative effect. Maybe I'm wrong. These things can't really be measured. Maybe the only difference between Worm and the other books is that Walbo had significantly more time to think about Worm. I don't know about you, but I would prefer one more book at the level of Worm instead of all of the other books combined. And I know how delusional I sound when I say this, but if I ever achieve my dream of interviewing Walbo here, that's one of the first things I would ask. What does the community need to give in order to get another book like Worm? Or what should we do to make it easier, hopefully possible, for him to edit Worm and make it into a book you can physically own? The reason this has not happened yet is that taking on one of these projects means not posting for a relatively long time, and I don't think the author trusts the community to hang around if he doesn't constantly entertain us. I don't know if we deserve that trust. In his essays about writing, Walbo talks about this trinity of author, text, and reader, and the 6 directions in which they affect one another. When I first read it, I completely disagreed. My model at the time was that the only important interactions were those between the author and the text and between the text and the reader, and that's it. It's funny that I completely dismissed the interaction between the author and the reader, considering the fact that I'm here now parasocial relationshiping the fuck out of this channel, being honest always, but at the same time very aware of the kind of persona that I'm creating in your head right now. But as aware as I now am of the effect the author has on the audience, I only recently began thinking of the way the audience affects the artist and the art. In the case of the micro-community we have here, it's mostly beneficial. I'm motivated by the positive comments, and if I make a joke that has a net negative value, I'll be nudged to reconsider it, and in that one case, realize that the comments were right and cut it out of the video. In Walbo's case, I think it's pretty safe to say that part of a community had a very positive effect, and another part had a detrimental effect, for him and for us. And this is so disappointing. Back to Worm, the feeling of disappointment, this disillusion, is the heart of everything that comes between Leviathan and the Slaughterhouse 9. If you don't know who the Slaughterhouse 9 are, spoilers. The Leviathan arc is about finding out that the world is worse than you thought. We'll see that with Leviathan himself and Dragon's inhuman condition, and with Regent's and Cole's powers. This is something that the reader has been exposed to in Worm way more than Taylor herself. When we find out that Emma used to be Taylor's best friend before ruining her life, our model for the world in which the story takes place is updated to one that is worse. When we find out that Emma started abusing Taylor shortly after her mom died, that makes the entire world worse still. We've seen disappointments on Taylor's side too, disappointments with Brian, Lisa and their values, the school system with heroes like Glorigirl and Armsmaster. So what gives me the right to say that this is what Leviathan is about if we've seen that pattern before? One is that the examples above were on a personal scale, and now we're going to see disappointments on a global scale. Another is that now we get these disappointments near constantly. Everything that comes up in this arc is about that horrifying disappointment. Well, almost everything. There's actually another theme hiding within the Leviathan arc, and that theme is the way in which a mostly decent community can be ruined by a spiteful minority, or as the internet memed it, this is why we can't have nice things. But here's the part that really kicks my ass. These are not two different themes. The disappointment from the fantastic elements is parallel to the disappointment from people that appears in Worm and sadly in the real world as well. Before we arrive at the Slaughterhouse 9, we're going to dive into that disappointment and, like every arc in Worm, figure out what we can do about it. Let's begin. We have a relatively long referential part today, so if you're not into the whole Bible story thing, feel free to skip ahead to the segment named Something Wicked This Way Comes. Yona the Prophet. In Hebrew, Leviathan just means whale. So the story of Jonah and the whale in Hebrew would just be Yona v'Haleviatan. Let's go over Yona's story. Book of Yona, chapter 1, line 1. God appears before Yona and says unto him, Go to the great city of Nineveh and tell them that their evils have been noticed by God and call upon them to worship God. Next sentence, zero explanation, and Yona set out to escape from God. The original refusal of the call. Why does he escape? Yes, you in the back? Yona doesn't want to get his ass kicked by the people of Nineveh. He tells them to stop doing all the fun stuff you can do when you don't believe in God, like eat bacon and have gay sex. Sounds very reasonable. Surprisingly, that is not the case, as we'll see soon. Whatever Yona's motivation is, he boards a ship, thinking that if he is physically outside of the Holy Land, then God's wrath won't reach him. Works for me, dog. For Yona, however, that does not work, and his ship is met with a great storm. The sailors begin to pray, each to his own god, but Yona knows that God is so angry with him that there is no use to praying, so he goes below deck and takes a nap. The captain goes below deck, asking Yona to pray with them, thinking, in a very polytheistic way, that it might be Yona's god that's causing this. Finally, Yona confesses to the captain and the rest of the sailors that, yeah, actually God is angry with him, and Yona is probably the cause for the storm. The sailors really try to avoid killing a man, but once they realize they have no choice, they toss Yona off deck. As soon as he hits the water, the storm subsides. The sailors take up the faith in God, and everybody's happy. Except for Yona, of course, who gets eaten by a whale. I'ma skip the 3 days of torment that he endures inside and go straight to the part where he gets spat onto the shore. God speaks to him again and says almost the exact same thing. There's no flexing. No, oh, you fucked up, dude. No, it's a simple, go to the city of Nineveh and tell them to worship me. I like this idea that it doesn't really matter if you fucked up. You should still keep doing what's right. And we'll see parallels of that in Worm. Another reason I thought this story was important was that the sailors unite against this deadly sea storm, and their unity results in human sacrifice. Yona goes to the city of Nineveh, gives them one hell of a preaching about how they should start worshipping God or their city will be destroyed. The people of Nineveh repent and fast in order to ask for God's forgiveness. Suffering together unites people in the same way that suffering alone isolates. And so, according to our social cohesion-focused interpretation of the Bible, it makes sense that fasting together saves the city from societal collapse. They take up the faith in God and everybody's happy. Except for Yona, who says unto God, you know what, this is exactly why I ran away. I knew that you'd forgive them and they don't deserve to be forgiven. It really hurts Yona that the people of Nineveh can bask in the light of God just like he can after they sinned for so long. How do we call this emotion? Is this justice or spite? Either way, these are the themes we're going to see in Leviathan. Did Wildbow mean to reference this story? That's for you to decide. The name Leviathan does not appear in the Book of Yona, but consensus among biblical scholars is that the monstrous sea beast that eats Yona is the same one that appears in Job and Psalms. The name Leviathan might refer to Thomas Hobbes' philosophical work of the same name. Tommy wrote it in a time of civil war in England, and in it he claimed that the natural state of human beings is war of all against all, and that falling back onto that natural state can only be prevented by a strong social contract with a strong sovereign. The term Leviathan is a name for society, a great entity compacted of civilians. Check out this frontispiece. I read it when I was half my current age, and from what I remember, the arguments were less than waterproof, but I also remember appreciating the perspective shift, to see ourselves not as individuals, autonomous and independent, but as parts of a greater whole. Any questions so far? Yes, you in the less wrong t-shirt. Yeah, I guess I don't really understand what's with the focus on community. Applying Occam's razor, doesn't it make more sense that Leviathan is just a biblical name for a frightening thing rising from the sea, and the people of Earth that just use that as a name for an endbringer who is in essence a frightening thing rising from the sea? In a vacuum, yes, but in Worm, symbolic names form a synergy, just like they did with Judas and Brutus. In this arc, we also learn the names of the two other Endbringers. What does the name Behemoth mean? Neither biblical nor modern Hebrew have a th sound. In Hebrew, it's Behemoth. The suffix ot means that we are dealing with a feminine plural. Behemah means beast. Behemoth simply means many beasts. It is the name of a great beast so large that it cannot be counted as just one, a great beast compacted of many. There is another interpretation, but this is the most common one. In Persian mythology, the simurgh is a benevolent predatory bird, but I'd like to talk about a specific 12th century poem by the poet Farid ud-Din Attar called The Conference of Birds. I know this sounds esoteric, but this is literally one of the first things that I found when reading about the simurgh. In the poem, the birds decide to seek out a sovereign for themselves. The birds hear that there is a being worthy of being king to all birds, the simurgh, whose name means 30 birds. The birds are told that the simurgh lives at the top of the mountain, and hundreds of them go to beseech it to rule them. Many die along the way, and worse yet, by the time the remaining few arrive at the top, they find there is no one there. How many of them are left by the end of the journey? You guessed it, 30. This council of 30 remaining birds is the simurgh, is the new king. The names Leviathan, Behemoth, and Simurgh all point out to the need to unite separate individuals into something great and powerful. These names remind us that this cohesion is missing. Now let's see how all of that comes into fruition in one of the most intense scenes that I've read in my life. Something wicked this way comes. When I read Leviathan for the second time, I was surprised to see how brilliantly information is handled. At the first read, you're so tense you can't really notice how you're being manipulated. When the story started, Taylor knew way more than us about Earth-Bit, stuff like the existence of capes. That was unavoidable. As we progressed, we were given enough information to be on equal footing with Taylor, and often knew more than her through the interludes. Here, we don't know what's going on, even though Taylor does, and the information is withheld from us. Why? What purpose does it serve? I have a request for you. As we go over this scene together, pretend that you don't know anything about Leviathan. Taylor just left Lisa and the Undersiders, even though she doesn't have anywhere to go. The siren blurs, and she instantly runs back into the loft, going back to Lisa, who's glued to the TV. Whatever's going on, the reader notes, is more important than what broke them apart. Lisa tells Taylor that the Undersiders already decided what they were going to do in the case of an Endbringer attack, that they would all go and fight. Taylor says that she would go also. Of course she would. She wouldn't be able to live with herself otherwise. We don't know what Endbringers are. We all intuitively follow Occam's razor, so we assume they are superpowered individuals, powerful and evil. The tension is high, and it's exactly at this point that the author takes us to Miss Militia's interlude. 2 paragraphs on that. I understand why some people skip interludes. You are dying to know what Leviathan is more than you wanted to know anything throughout this book, and suddenly you are thrown into some third world conflict that doesn't give you the information that you want. This seems in line with the engineering philosophy that manifests in this book. The author has created enough tension to know that they are going to keep you reading, and then they can afford to bore you a bit. I trusted the author, so I kept reading the interlude, but I had a feeling like at the start of a run, knowing that I have to push through the initial reluctance. But if there's no trust between the author and the reader just skips ahead, just like we're about to do now. We'll get back to it later, though. Taylor and Lisa go down to street level, and we see the response to the Endbringer. Civilians evacuating into shelters in a half-panic, chaos amidst the streets. What is it that makes them so terrified? We are kept in the dark, but are constantly given these bits of information to illuminate just a little more. Taylor describes how chaotic the crowds are, that even though Endbringer procedures say that people should take the necessary minimum and go on foot, Taylor sees people driving cars through the crowds at speeds slower than walking, people carrying suitcases, and even a kid with an iguana in a glass terrarium. But people were stupid, Taylor notes. A chronic condition of our society that so many people thought they were special, the exception to the rule. In the panicked crowd, every rule was being broken. The informational tension is so high that it's easy to miss that this isn't just a painfully realistic description of the behavior of crowds, but a block in the philosophical statement that this arc makes. Taylor comes up to a police officer in full villain gear, and the police officer, instead of opening fire, just hands her a piece of paper with instructions on where to go. Notice that this pseudo-trust immediately manifests as instructions and compliance. This Endbringer, whatever that entity is causing so much fear that it works as a uniting force strong enough to make the villains skitter and these police officers be on the same side. Bakuda and Lung were designed to be paragons of fear, and Leviathan is feared much more than they ever were. Taylor and Lisa arrive at the PRT building and are not only greeted by a clap on the shoulder by Weld, the awkward metal boy, but enter a hall where we see the full extent of the alliance. Armsmaster and Miss Militia are standing not too far from Kaiser and Hookwolf, a convicted murderer. Amy stares at Tattletale but does not engage. And within this great party of unification, everyone settles into their groups. Lisa squeezes Taylor's hand and leaves to join Alec and Brian. They both look at Taylor, then look away. It hurts. Taylor tries to cope with some, "It was petty of me to care, it wasn't important, but yeah, you know what, when you're facing something that terrifying, it's fucking nice to have somebody to hold your hand." Taylor looks over at Sundancer, who makes eye contact once and then avoids it. Taylor really expected to have a friend, but from Sundancer's perspective, the fact Taylor has cut the unconscious Lung's eyes out makes her what you'd call, in everyday terms, a fucking psycho. Taylor's drowning in loneliness here, and that isn't just suffering for suffering's sake. That is another block in the statement being made. Why is Taylor so lonely, so disconnected? Depending on the connection severed. With the Undersiders, it was because she did the right thing of refusing to cooperate with Coyle when she found out about Dina. With Sundancer, it was because she applied necessary violence, I think. In both cases, Taylor did the right thing, and in both cases, she paid an excruciating price. Hold on to that thought. Taylor notes that seeing Alexandria talking to Armsmaster is strangely exciting to her, one of the strongest capes ever talking to someone she talked to. She is thrilled by that second-hand connection to her. Again, she tells herself that isn't important, and again, she lies. Legend walks into the scene and gives a pre-battle speech, and Taylor gets the tingles at having this connection with him. He tells them that 1 out of 4 would die. The reader is prompted to deduce these super powerful capes fought Leviathan before and didn't kill him. What the hell is he? Legend finishes the speech by saying that this is why they tolerate us. That is, this is why the baseline humans tolerate capes. And that is such a hyper-dense statement. Is he saying that parahumans are naturally adversarial to humans, but they unite against the common enemy that is the Endbringers? This is something pretty big that Lisa neglected to mention during her Cops and Robbers speech. But yeah, if you were asking yourself why the wards are sent to take care of the bank robbery instead of a SWAT team, this might give a possible answer. The populace agree to have the wards train against the Undersiders in preparation for the next Endbringer attack. Now this is what I call reconstruction. But the reader doesn't have time to think about that, just like they don't have time to think about the fact that the Endbringer attack in Japan explains why USA Bet has so many Japanese immigrants. Weld is handing out Dragon-made wristbands that will help people communicate, though not directly. Dragon's software is only going to relay what it thinks is crucial and reword for efficiency. Legend starts positioning the groups based on broad categories. Force fields, long-range shooters, brutes, masters of expendable minions, etc. Armsmaster goes over to the Undersiders and asks where Hellhound is, and Lisa tells him that he's lucky that she wasn't there to hear him talking about her favorite beings in this world as expendable. Why is it important that he's calling her Hellhound? Yes, you in the back. Yeah, actually I have another question. Does everybody get their messages reworded by the wristband? Good question. No, some high-level heroes have the option to give an emergency message, meaning that the villains have lesser rights when it comes to conveying information. Legend keeps calling on different categories, none of which Taylor belongs to. She doesn't belong in any group, and that is hard, but she doesn't have too long to wallow in the feeling of not being picked for soccer. The water crashing against the building breaks the windows open, ending the meeting. Armsmaster calls for Strider to get them out, and then Taylor finds herself outside after being teleported. Nobody told her that she's going to be teleported, or what being teleported by this Lord of the Rings fan, Strider, is like. She's on her hands and knees, gagging on salt water. We're going to discuss Taylor's gag reflex in depth, but at this point neither the reader nor Taylor have time to think about it, because Leviathan is right there. He walks from the sea onto the beach. The rain's so heavy that he's just a silhouette barely seen. The reader is so thirsty for information that every bit that comes is like a sip of water for a person stranded in the desert, if that sip of water somehow made you even thirstier. Think about the reaction that the reader has when each detail is revealed. He's 30 feet or 10 meters tall. Okay, we've seen that before. Dragging his knuckles on the ground. What? Swinging his top-heavy torso from side to side with each step. Okay, I guess. Though his head twitches in all directions like an erratic eye. What? His face has no mouth or nose. What? Then how? 4 eyes. That's relatively normal. 3 on the left and 1 on the right. Huh? Every time he moves, he leaves behind an after-image of water in an equal volume to his. What even is that? I'm not even talking about preservation of matter energy, just what? And then he charges faster than any speedster into the midst of the capes and starts just thrashing them. Here, Taylor's chapter ends, and we move to the true horror. Tattletale's Interlude. Tattletale's Interlude is really one of the most terrifying interludes in this book. Yes? What? I don't remember it being scary at all. Great, this is what we're here for. Lisa's interlude is all about disillusion. We go back to the time before Lisa joined the Undersiders, a lonely, superpowered pickpocket. The first thing that we see is how horrible it was to be a homeless girl on the boardwalk. We see how exposed Lisa was to violence and abuse, that everyone knew and nobody cared. It's something that we had no view of. Realizing that every time that Taylor went for a coffee with Brian on the boardwalk, kids like Lisa were ignored or roughed up by the boardwalk private security makes those pseudo-dates seem worse. In the interlude, the vendors aren't exactly mean to Lisa, they just don't see her as human. Coil's mercenaries come to pick her up and nobody does anything for the simple reason that one of them wears a security uniform. Said mercenary frisks Lisa and pulls out a knife that she never had on her. Nobody's going to believe her, and so he now has a perfect mandate to do whatever he wants with her, which in this case is to take her to a secluded alley and punch her in the solar plexus, maximizing pain. Ah, she swore. I love these little bits of prose where you need to put it together yourself and realize that what she was trying to say was fuck. She crumples to the ground and is given a phone, which leads to her first direct interaction with Coil. He says, I want to buy your services. Lisa's power lets her know that there will be no negotiation, which tells us that he basically forced her to work for him. And still, back at the Dina reveal, Lisa told Coil that she likes him. When she meets Rachel, Brian, and Alec for the first time, she recognizes that these people are dysfunctional, and that their specific dysfunctions are obvious. It was almost reassuring, she narrates. It meant that she didn't find out something ugly days, weeks, or months down the line. Whatever the ugly thing that had once taken her by complete surprise, she was so disappointed with somebody that it's not worth it for her to hang out with normies, because with people who aren't absolutely wrecked by trauma, there's a healthy degree of pretense, and you can be disappointed by them. Particularly if you try to do something good like build a trusting relationship. So Lisa chooses to either hang out with antisocial people or later on with Taylor because she knows that Taylor is a sweetheart. But now we understand why she likes Coil. Also, with him, what you see is what you get. He's horrible, but he won't disappoint you. More than anything else, Lisa tries to protect herself from that disappointment. Her interlude ends in the present, with her calling a flyer to bring her up to a roof so she could take a better look at Leviathan. There she describes one of the loneliest images in this book. Taylor is standing alone, a piece of garbage sticking to her shoulder. Taylor's got no one to tell her that it's there, to take it off for her. Leviathan's actions push Lisa off the roof to drop down to ground level. I honestly can't believe that writing that is so thematically tight even exists. Do you see the parallel? The higher they come, the harder they fall. Climbing and dropping is the physical metaphor for hoping and being let down. The last thing she does is call herself an idiot. Through Taylor's perspective, we saw Lisa having so much fun being the smartest person in the room, taunting Glory Girl, Lit, and even Armsmaster. We've already seen Lisa kick Alec under the table for implying that somebody else is smarter than her, and now we realize that it's not a quirk, but a manifestation of her core fear. Smart talking, showing off, even choosing to hang out with antisocial people, it's all a defense against the one thing that she can't take.
Feeling like a fool. Taylor watches as Leviathan kills dozens of people in seconds. Villains and heroes are dropping like flies. Taylor's armband lists the dead and wounded in rapid fire, and you can feel how each one of these martyrs had their own personality, just from their names. Names like Biter and Chubster stand out next to Good Neighbor and Ascendant. The villains that came up against Leviathan knew that they might die, and knew, as we will see later, that they will not be thanked for any of this. Coil, for instance, didn't show up, or did he, and never seems to pay any price for it. But the ones who came, the ones who risked their lives to marginally increase the chance of this natural disaster being stopped, or maybe just mitigated. Now that we begin to understand what Leviathan is, we have to stop and ask why they are there. If Brian wanted to protect his sister, wouldn't it be easier to use his power to take her away? Does Rachel risk the lives of her dogs and herself because she can't run away with all of the dogs in the shelter? Is Alec just there for the lols, or is he there for his teammates? Is Kaiser there because of PR concerns? Or is it that according to his ideal, it is better to die facing your enemy in order to secure a better future for our children than to run away? This is already something so different than what we see in superhero media. This isn't the dramatic ending of a redemption arc. This is a normal thing that happens regularly. Similarly, there is a sense of unfairness that the Marvel Universe would avoid. In the Avengers, Thanos, an alien from another planet with a completely different biology, actually takes damage when punched by one human soldier on really good performance enhancers. In Worm, this one dude got a set of powers that lets him tear into dozens of capes repeatedly. It is so unfair. In her interlude, Lisa takes one glance at Leviathan and her power tells her that it was never human. What is it, then? Why is it here? What does it want? Taylor joins in, even though her bugs are virtually useless against this creature that is tougher than metal and spews water everywhere. Capes that are 10 leagues above Taylor give their best shots, and still it seems like they barely give Leviathan cuts and bruises. Even a flechette going through his head doesn't really slow him down as he slaughters and slaughters. And the wristband just keeps going. Down, deceased, deceased, down. Leviathan does not differentiate between hero and villain. The heroic sacrifices are just as meaningless as the villainous ones. It was at that point that I started to suspect that the story is about the absence of God, or worse, the cruelty of God. Leviathan prompts you to ask, what kind of God would let that thing exist? This is an idea that I got from talking to Lovecraft fans, though I never felt that with Cthulhu. With Leviathan, I felt it. The thing that should not be. If Lovecraft would have written Worm, it would have ended here. Just the horror of the thing existing, being described by the narrator as they lose their mind. But the beauty of Worm is that concepts interesting enough to write whole books about are layered one on top of the other, making the story conceptually hyperdense without sacrificing momentum. All this philosophical tension is in the background while Taylor runs around trying to help however she can, which mostly means giving CPR. Why is she there even after figuring out that her power is completely useless? At this point, we can leave the trusting and distrusting interpretations behind and just sum up Taylor's motivations. She genuinely wants to help because she's a good person. Sure, but I bet there's a part of her that's aware that this is a great way to earn some credit. She's teamless and extremely alone. If she saves someone's life, they owe her a favor. Maybe an addition to their team? If she somehow finds a way to affect Leviathan in a noticeable way, Glory Girl might be more hesitant about throwing her in the birdcage next time they meet. Taylor might die, sure, but I get the feeling that she doesn't feel too negatively about that, as we'll soon see proof of. There is room to talk about Taylor in a more psychological way. Maybe she wants to sacrifice herself in order to justify her own existence. Sadly, we don't have time to talk about all of the lenses, so we're going to stick to an outcome-focused one. In a similar vein, there's a whole lot of interesting things happening in this fight, but in this analysis we'll focus on 4. Taylor leaves 2 men to die, one sadly and one gladly. Arnsmaster loses his mind, and Taylor loses sensation in her legs. Let's start with the first one. Taylor finds a cape, presumably Chubster, lying face down in shallow water. She turns him over and tries to give him CPR, which fails, and Walbo bestows upon us this beautiful description of how Taylor tastes that the dude has vomited inside his own mouth, how the salt water accentuates the taste of the vomit, like salt, bringing out the taste of a savory dish, which is just, it's just so disgusting. But why is Walbo making us suffer? One reason is to make Taylor more heroic, or to give her an opportunity to show how heroic she is. She's not just risking her life by getting herself out in the open, but it's also gross as hell. Somebody else might have just ignored the puke in the man's mouth, but Taylor, the most sensitive member of our group, according to Lisa, can't block it away. She analyzes it. It's really hard for her to give this man CPR, and still, she does it. And it's not just objectively gross, this is triggering memories from the worst thing that happened to Taylor, arguably ever. Taylor isn't just a person who pukes easily. She threw up just from the locker's smell before being shoved into it. Every time she gags, a part of her goes back to that day. Any other reasons? Yes, you with the lewd t-shirt? This is obviously a tendency of the author. In Pale, the girls are drowned, choked, suffocated, threatened to have their mouth filled with goblin filth, and one girl is forced to eat a live centipede. None of Pale's protagonists have this kind of gagging-related trauma, except for maybe Lucy, so it just feels like a flavor of discomfort that the author is into. First of all, that flavor pun was in bad taste. Secondly, though I can understand why someone would come to that conclusion, I don't think it has a place in an analysis of the book itself. Within Worm, Taylor is more or less the only one besides Noelle that has to deal with puking and gagging this much. And it makes more sense to me that it's a symbol of a Sartre-esque nausea from the world she lives in, which really connects with the themes of this arc. Anyway, a tidal wave approaches and Taylor can't carry the fat man to safety, so she leaves him to die. She had made the pretty reasonable choice of not dying in a futile attempt to save the man, but she still chose. And we start to see a clear trend in how Taylor finds herself more and more comfortable with doing horrible things. I wonder how that's gonna play out. The tidal wave comes and she just barely gets into Shielder's bubble in time to not drown or get crushed to death. The casualties are so numerous that the wristband itself is overwhelmed, giving out an error message. When Taylor gets out of the bubble, the wristband pulls itself together and just starts reciting the list of losses, an unending torrent of names. It feels so futile. Most of the people who died didn't even hurt Leviathan. They just stood there, looking for a way to contribute, until a tidal wave took them out of action. The names keep hitting Taylor, and with each one you can feel how she cares a little less, until she hears a name that she does care about. Tattletale. Taylor raises her head, looking around as if she could see where Tattletale is, before finding comfort in literary analysis, like the rest of us. What does the word losses mean? Does it mean deceased or wounded? We were with Lisa on the roof when that tidal wave hit. It didn't look good. I remember reading this for the first time and realizing that he might just do this to me, that the book might just be this bleak. Taylor is about as lonely as she was at the beginning. There is one person close enough to actually squeeze her hand, and that person might have just died. What was it that made it feel so real? I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Death in real life is rarely seeing somebody breathe out their last breath and then watch their eyes glass over. It rarely has this instant certainty. More often, it's something that comes in stages of increasing certainty. Like seeing your dad pick up the phone and when he speaks, there's something off in his voice. Then suddenly seeing him cry for the first time in your life. It's wanting really badly for him to put down the phone already and tell you what's going on, but when he finally does, you suddenly really don't want to know. There's a cascade. The uncertainty decreases and decreases until at some point you accept that you're just never going to see that person again, never going to speak to that person again, you're never going to hug that person again, never going to even speak to that person on the phone, never going to get a text from them. This is a sentiment that I wouldn't know how to put into words. Luckily for me, the supreme poet Eva Hendricks did that for me, with the extremely succinct, "Now I'm awake, and you are not." And Tattletale's name being spoken by the wristband feels like the beginning of that cascade. Taylor wonders, is her friend already gone, or is she bleeding out somewhere, or is she lying face down in a puddle, drowning with no one to help her? Leviathan doesn't give her time to wonder. He throws a piece of rubble at her, and Aegis, who not so long ago tried to arrest her, now jumps to protect Taylor. Taylor is saved, but a man standing next to her dies on the spot. Did Taylor do anything to deserve to live while Bringadine just got to think his last ever thoughts that were probably something stupid like, oh, fuck no. More tidal waves. Taylor breaks her arm horribly and soon after gets thrown by a tidal wave that sends her to roll over it. Pain consumes her, she gags and barely manages to pull her mask up in time so as not to drown in her own puke. In the chaos, she comes across Armsmaster fighting Leviathan. He's actually doing alright. He's got a halberd that cuts through more or less anything with nanomachines, son, and a predictive software that predicts Leviathan's movements, which is a really cool concept for 2011. The fact that Armsmaster, who's basically an Iron Man with a really sharp knife, does more damage than Alexandria, who's basically Superman, is crucial for two reasons. On a smaller scale, Armsmaster's ability to predict Leviathan's actions is going to be crucial for the upcoming plot twist. On a bigger scale, it reminds us that information is queen. Those of you who studied martial arts for long enough know how frustrating it is to fight that old out-of-shape dude that can barely move but predicts every single one of your moves. You can be stronger, faster, and with better stamina, but if the other side can read you, you're going to lose. On a more human level, however, Armsmaster is really revealed as a character here. He doesn't know that Taylor is there, and so he does that awkward thing that happens when you think you're alone and talking to yourself and then realize someone was in earshot all along. Hannah's interlude ended in Armsmaster's office, where he complained about his diminishing status in the PRT right before he was cut off by his predictive software, notifying him that Leviathan is coming. In horror, Hannah noted that Armsmaster seemed excited by that, as if the coming disaster was an opportunity for him. And as we hear him talking to himself through Taylor's ears, we tend to agree. What starts out as reasonable monologuing about how much data he collected about Leviathan escalates into proper insanity. I know what you're going to do next. You're going to try to catch me from behind with a wave. You don't even speak English, do you? Which is how I talk to Dark Souls bosses when there is zero stakes. Leviathan might not understand the very concept of language, or he might be fluent in all of the languages, or he might have Tattletale's power on top of everything else. There is no way of knowing. Giving that information away, telling your opponent what you expect them to do, it's not just that Taylor would never do that. You would never do that against an opponent like Leviathan. The fight goes really well in Armsmaster's favor. He dodges every attack while cutting deeper and deeper into Leviathan with the nanotechnology blade. Every time Leviathan tries to escape, Armsmaster catches him with a grappling hook that can apply Clockblockers' power, though he doesn't say his name, instead referring to him as a subordinate. Why is that important? Yes? Yeah, actually, I have a question. What are the trusting and distrusting interpretations of Armsmaster in this segment? Well, I think the distrusting interpretation is that he is consumed by his own megalomania. There is no positive outcome to showing off. The trusting interpretation... You know what? I don't think this son of a hellhound deserves a trusting interpretation. But what about a compassionate one? Armsmaster got dealt a horrible hand. While other people got powers that let them fly or do other cool shit, Armsmaster just had to work all of the time, either making stuff or writing code or working out. Dauntless just magics his shield into being stronger and is climbing up the PRT ranks faster than Armsmaster, who basically gave up on the concept of a good night's sleep. Leviathan is a symbol of that unfairness. His powers are the most unfair, and yeah, Armsmaster takes that frustration out on him because finally he's allowed to. During the fight, he becomes more and more cruel as Leviathan becomes more injured and frail, and Armsmaster is dancing around him, taunting him until Leviathan raises a claw and a storm drain full of water breaks its way up through the asphalt, like a whale rising from the waves. What a strange way to phrase it. What a unique way to phrase this. I wonder what this means. Armsmaster has shrugged his responsibility out of spite, and now he is getting punished for it, though his torment is shorter than Yona's. Leviathan effortlessly catches him mid-parkour leap and rips his arm off, then tosses him aside easily. Leviathan's injuries are still there, but suddenly they don't seem to affect him as much or at all. He stops favoring one leg and walks normally away. It was all a fake-out. And why wouldn't it be? It's not just that we already saw that Leviathan didn't really care about getting its head pierced by Flechette. We had this assumption that something so strong has to be stupid, but it doesn't have to be this way. Leviathan was straight up bullying Armsmaster, giving him hope so he could take it away, in a way that reminded me of Sophia. This is the point of this. You see how unfair this world is, that Taylor's life wasn't an anomaly. Anyway, Taylor runs up to Armsmaster and puts pressure on the bleeding wound where his shoulder used to be. This is really important. A ripped limb means arterial bleeding, which is fast. Taylor is very likely saving the man's life. I've neglected to mention this before, but at some point during the fighting, Taylor's wristband died, reporting to everyone else that she died. And so when Armsmaster can focus enough to recognize her, the first thing he says is, you're dead. Again, not using her name. Why is that important? Yes, you with the Spoilers Ahead t-shirt? Yeah, what I don't understand is if Armsmaster was the one that killed Taylor's wristband with his EMP, why is he surprised that she's still alive? Is he acting really well? Whoa. We're not going to get into that until the next video, but that is a really good question. Is this a vestigial remnant from an earlier draft in which Armsmaster wasn't the cause for Taylor's wristband dying? Or is Armsmaster so on his game that even though his arm was just ripped off, he still says the right thing as if he didn't know? Either way, we'll get to that later. Before Leviathan turned Armsmaster into Armmaster, Taylor got some bugs into the cuts and wounds that were made by stronger heroes, and now she can use her power to track his location. She finally finds something useful to do in the form of reporting to people where Leviathan is. Of course, her reports are delayed because she doesn't have permission to speak. She speaks to Dragon's AI that speaks an abbreviated version of her reports to everybody else. In a fight against something as quick as Leviathan, that means that people are dying because of that delay. The frustrated Taylor does the only thing that she can, which is comply. Lady Photon and Laser Dream arrive. Yeah, at this point the reader starts to feel the burden of having too many faces and names to remember, which is a feature, I promise. After a short deliberation, they decide that Laser Dream will fly Taylor so that Leviathan won't leave her range. But they don't call her Taylor or even Skitter, they call her the girl, like she doesn't even warrant a name. Why is that important? Yes, you with the tears in your eyes. I just wanted to say that I really liked in this scene that you can see how hard it is for Photon Mom to let her daughter go back to fight the thing that killed half of her immediate family. In the span of the last, hour, Taylor described that Photon Mom looked like making that decision aged her years, which I thought was a really efficient way to show that a lot of people on the battlefield are going through something extremely traumatic just like Taylor is. Furthermore, Lady Photon is in a way even more heroic than Taylor because she cares about her daughter's life more than Taylor cares about her own. Good point. Taylor takes the halberd and Laser Dream flies her around. She drops Taylor to go and fight Leviathan herself. There's a very deconstruction-y element to this story that, unlike the Avengers wreaking havoc in a very sterile New York, this feels familiar. The wooden debris that carries in the stream is the wreckage of the boardwalk where Taylor and Brian had coffee together barely weeks ago. The streets that are now flooded with water are ones that she walked through hundreds of times. Leviathan draws on a sweetwater aquifer to create a lake in the middle of the city, and he does it right outside of the entrance to Cole's HQ, where Taylor had been almost fighting with Brian barely 2 hours ago. Now this feels like Taylor's life might end here as the ground collapses under her. Laser Dream saves her from drowning at the last second. There is a reason I'm noting this. Leviathan's urban renovations threaten to drown out one of the shelters, and so Taylor and a bunch of other capes try to open the door and evacuate people. But the door won't open because of the weight of the water and needs to be cut open. Because Taylor only has one unbroken arm, she gives the nanotechnology halberd to another cape so that he could open the door with it. The people start swarming out. Taylor looks over the rows of people, irrationally hoping to find her father in the crowd, but instead she spots her teacher, Mr. Gladly, who had left her to be abused by Emma and Sophia and a whole gang of girls with her back against the lockers. He is there with the taller woman who's holding his hand. Taylor says that it pisses her off to see him with a girlfriend and notes how strange it is that it bugs her this much at this time. Why does it? Maybe it's like with Emma and her mother at the banquet that he gets to have something Taylor wishes she did. Maybe it's the fact that this woman probably believes his perspective of the events. He really is a cool teacher. This woman is another person that doesn't believe Taylor's perspective. She's never heard it, but she's already on the other side, on the side of the man that left Taylor to die. Taylor is no crybaby. She doesn't complain when she gets her bones broken. She never pities herself, even when she's singled out for no reason. She asks, what the fuck, but she never asks, why me? When she says that Gladly left her to die, she means that literally. By leaving her to her bullies, he'd left her to be pushed over the edge of suicide. Anyway, Leviathan returns, and the people who were just coming out of the shelter start running back into the shelter, trampling one another. Again, a lack of cooperation making the group worse off. As they rush back, they force Taylor between the door and the wall, which sort of saves her life. As Leviathan crawls into the shelter like a wasp crawling into a nest of bees, he passes by her. She uses the fact that he has his back to her to sneak outside, leaving Gladly to die. She says it herself, calling it a dark mirror to what he did to her. Now, this sounds worse than it actually is. Taylor doesn't have a sci-fi weapon on her. She's a teenage girl with a broken arm against a colossus with metal skin. At that point, she doesn't even have enough bugs to create a convincing decoy. I don't think living Gladly is that bad. What is bad, however, is that as she leaves Gladly, his girlfriend screaming into his shoulder with pretty justified mortal terror, she doesn't care.
She said, I should feel bad my teacher was about to die, but all I could think was how he'd ignored me. Okay, great, she doesn't care about Gladly, fine. What about everyone else in the shelter? With every whip of his tail, Leviathan kills a dozen or 24 people, but these people aren't even mentioned as people that Taylor doesn't care about. There's something really strange going on here. Taylor doesn't do anything different from what she did when she left Chubster to die. But she doesn't care. Her spite towards Gladly is so strong that she doesn't really consider the others. Remember that when Taylor just got into the shelter, the first thing she did was try to see if her father was there. While she sneaks out, he isn't mentioned once. I think there is a karmic move here as well. Leaving a man to die makes it easier to leave another man to die. She waltzes out of the shelter and finds Laser Dream face down in the water. Taylor flips her over, saving her from drowning just like she had saved Taylor. I don't know if she picks up the habit during that one act, but as she finds the halberd she gave another cape, next to the corpse of said cape, she picks it up and goes back to the shelter, claiming that she has to be better than Mr. Gladly. Yes? Why does she need to be better than Mr. Gladly? Extremely good question. If I don't answer that by the end of this series, consider my promise unfulfilled. Taylor goes into the shelter with the halberd in her good hand, sneaks up on Leviathan, and sticks it way up where his asshole should be, as if, again, he were a Dark Souls boss. She does some damage, making him less mobile, and more importantly, interrupting his killing spree. Being small enough to run through the door while he has to squeeze through, she manages to escape. But he eventually crawls out, chases her, and with a casual whip of his water echo slams her against the wall, breaking her spine. Notice that this is the opposite of divine justice. When she did the bad thing, abandoned Gladly to die, she was on her way to survival. When she did the good thing, saving a lot of lives, she got what she described as the most intense physical pain of her life, worse than Bakura's pain bomb. Why? Yes. To make it absolutely undeniable that there is no God that's passing judgment and making sure people get what they deserve. But how do we reconcile that with previous comparisons we've made between Taylor and figures like Isaac and Jacob? Good answer and very good question, which I will answer by the end of this video. So at this point, Taylor has fallen and can't get up due to the fact that her brain's communication with her legs has been literally severed. Worse, she fell face down in the water. I don't know about you, but I thought she might really die there, and I was going to read the rest of the book from Brian's perspective or some shit. Her thoughts before death are profoundly weird, which seems to me very realistic. Numbly following Leviathan with her power as he kills the wounded, being disappointed from the fact that the last view that she's going to see is dirty water through the yellow lenses she cut out of a pair of diving goggles in what feels like another lifetime. Wondering about the fat man that she has left to die and wondering, is this karma? Nope. The way Westerners talk about karma is that if you do good things will magically happen to you. That has very little to do with the Eastern concept of karma, and everything to do with our repressed notion of God. Rachel saves Taylor, which is karma. Check it. Rachel is in the middle of sending her dogs to fight Leviathan when she notices Taylor drowning. She would probably ignore an unfamiliar cape dying in the same way that Photon Mom wouldn't really care about a drowning cat while she sent her daughter to battle. Let's dive into that comparison. Remember how much we felt for Photon Mom when she was sending her daughter to fight Leviathan? Rachel is sending her closest family members to a direct confrontation, knowing for sure that most would die, while Photon Mom sent one daughter to fire lasers from afar. Rachel is not in a condition to help anybody, but she still pulls Taylor out of the water. Why? Because Taylor took the time to shovel dog shit and create a strong bond with Rachel. A bond of trust. It sure would be awful if some piece of information broke that trust in the next scene. I love this sequence so much. Taylor is being punished for doing a good deed, which is the clearest manifestation of the absence of God, and then is saved by the truer God, that is karmic propagation, society, the results of our actions. But nobody remembers that part. Why? Because it's exactly at that moment that San appears, representing the false God. This hero, being Jesus-shaped and golden calf-colored, is not God, but as he flies in and saves everybody, we can't help but feel awe. Even as she is in excruciating pain, Taylor watches closely and helplessly as San does in mere seconds more damage to Leviathan than all of the capes combined managed to inflict throughout the entirety of the battle. One point in favor of San's godhood, though. In Job, Leviathan is described as a creature that cannot be hurt by man, only by God, which fits. Finally, San drives Leviathan away. A teleporter takes Taylor to the hospital, and for the first time in a while, we can breathe. Summary. Now, I know what you're thinking. Is this structure really there? No God, true God, false God? Or am I just finding connection where there aren't any? Could be. I sometimes find clues where I shouldn't. My father's name's acronym is the equivalent of Dad. My parents called me Aaron, and like the biblical character, I too had a brother with a severe speech impediment. I'm pretty sure nobody did that on purpose. On the other hand, I couldn't find any connections like this in Pale, and I really tried. In Worm, Armsmaster name, Colin, means pup in Irish and victory in French, which works for his state of development and main motivation respectively. Miss Militia, however, gets the same name as Taylor's mom, which can't be a coincidence, but I can't figure out what it could mean. Is she what Annette would have become if she had been born into a violent conflict? The biblical Hannah spoke to God, but Hannah just sees God without talking to it. If you figured it out, please let me know. Just no word of God, please. I don't care. More important than whether a connection was put there is what I can say through it. And I want to say that the difference between no God and true God is not that clear. Job suffers greatly even though he is a good person. The people of Nineveh get saved even though they were bad. Perhaps that is the real thing that should not be. The real disillusion that we need to face, that the world isn't fair. We've known that, of course, but Leviathan takes us through it, makes us feel it. I didn't learn anything new by reading Wildbow's post for this essay, but it still made me feel like shit and reminded me that even if I ever create something as good as Worm, I might not get justly rewarded for it. This is going to be a short summary without the preachy, overly personal part. We haven't completed the argument yet. As you probably noticed, in the introduction I talked about how we can't have nice things because of a spiteful minority, and we haven't even gotten to that part in Worm yet. So far, I've only presented the first two blocks of Leviathan's argument, disillusion and decency. Yes?
I feel like we have a pretty good grip on what disillusion is, but we haven't really defined decency. What is it in this context?
Good question. We defined heroism as taking on suffering intentionally in order to make others suffer less. Decency is a specific case of heroism that has to do with putting aside differences in order to deal with a crisis together. When Leviathan approaches, the heroes and villains put aside their agendas to protect their city. We can talk about the distrusting interpretations of some people about the status and possible alliance gains, but there's one reason I failed to mention: a basic decency. Stepping up is just something they feel like they should do, in a very intuitive, emotional sense. This is very different from the Undersiders uniting in order to rob banks together. That was mere opportunism, as each one joined for their own personal gain. With Leviathan, if one cape chooses not to join, the other capes would do the dirty work for them. The villains uniting against Bakuda and Lung were a gray area in between. But what about us? What are we uniting against? We'll dig into human behavior in the next video, so for now, I'd like to talk about something less human. I wouldn't go as far as saying that Leviathan is a symbol for death, but I see some parallels. Death is impersonal and indiscriminate, and still so horrible that even when it happens to someone else, you can go through most of your life feeling like you haven't fully recovered from it. There's a reason that in this book about morality and the importance of our actions, Annette dies in an accident. It's not a person that could be blamed. Yes? Charlie? We're all going to die, all of us. What a circus. That alone should make us love each other. But it doesn't. Very well put. That's what made me hate Emma so much when I realized that she started the bullying right after Taylor's mom died. I had an expectation that even though she's a high school bully, she'd have the decency to lay off of someone who is still reeling from their encounter with the ultimate enemy, the one we're all going to face at some point. And it's so much harder to stay decent when facing that kind of indecency. We all feel the desire to stop trying when we see other people aren't doing their part. So what does Taylor do? For now, we've seen her refuse to hurt Emma out of petty spite. And when it came to Gladly, who's allowed Emma to push Taylor towards death, she stepped up where he stepped down. I still can't explain why she does it, not exactly, but I know that it's so important that she does. In the next video, we're going to talk about indecency and spite, and the one after that about how Taylor makes the world more decent. I hope. You'd be surprised at how little control I have over these essays. I won't repeat the mistake of committing to a timetable, but I will say that these videos are going to be my main focus for a while. Huge thanks to my... Wait a second, that can't be right. 3 patrons? Dr. Chike, your Jordans are fake, are they? And a man whose name means an oak of joy. Until next time, stay decent, you hear?